You're listening to Mental Health Colorado's Voices for Healthier Minds interview series, where we interview remarkable people doing remarkable work to advance health of mind in Colorado and beyond. Please welcome your host, Vincent Atchity, President and CEO of Mental Health Colorado, and our special guest. We hope you enjoy the conversation.
Good afternoon, and welcome to the Voices for Healthier Minds interview series. I'm Vincent Atchity. I'm the CEO of Mental Health Colorado, and we work to promote healthier minds across the lifespan for all Coloradans. And this interview series brings voices from around the state and nation who are powerful voices for healthier minds. Today, I'm very happy to have with us as our guest, Dr. Ashley Brock-Baca from the Butler Institute for Families at the University of Denver. Dr. Brock-Baca, Ashley, welcome. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks. I'm really happy to be here.
We've got so much we can talk about. I really enjoyed meeting you at our last conversation, but let's get right into it. So just by way of introducing yourself, my take is you're a developmental psychologist, and you work at the intersection of behavioral health, early childhood, child welfare, education, and juvenile justice, which is a wide lens with lots of intercepting mission alignment for us at Mental Health Colorado. What drew you to this work? Was there a moment or experience that pointed you here? Am I characterizing your work and focus correctly? Please set us straight.
Yes. So I think that's a good description of the work that I do. And I've been interested in child development for a long time, which I think is rooted in my fascination with understanding the brain-body connection, and how this guides us through our environment, how we learn and grow, and also how individuals can be so different from each other. And yet there are also so many things that are really common to all humanity. But I think what drew me to working with populations involved in multiple systems is some data analysis that I did in my first job after my postdoc. So I was analyzing a large amount of data from all the child and youth serving systems in Colorado to see what overlap there was between the children involved in these systems, and that impacted or how that impacted the number and the intensity of services needed and the child's trajectory. And what we found was that in addition to there being a lot of overlap between these systems, there's a really small percentage of children who account for a lot of the costs to these systems because they need a lot of services. And this really piqued my curiosity because it hinted that there was some complexity in these children and families. And I was interested in figuring out what could be done to best meet the needs of these families who are involved in so many systems, but yet it seems like their needs aren't being met by any or all of them.
How interesting. And I wonder about the intergenerational nature of that demand, whether that overlap with systems involvement also involves adults and extended adult family or something like that, that whole ecosystemic picture of things.
Yeah, so we didn't examine the intergenerational aspect in that specific study that I was working on at the time, but we certainly know that that is the case, that things like intergenerational trauma can impact families in a way that when needs are not met, they sort of extend throughout generations and can have an impact on subsequent generations as well.
Yeah. So, I'm going to jump around with a bunch of different questions about your work. So one of the things, and we started talking because we share a concern for the state of youth mental health in Colorado, and understand that we're in a state of some kind of crisis. And we've seen that CDC data show that 42% of high school students experience persistent feelings of sadness or hopelessness, which is a 57% increase over the past decade. So when you look at those numbers through your multi-cross systemic lens and your developmental psychologist lens, what concerns you most about that picture of the state of things with young people?
Yeah. So I think this is a really sad statistic that masks a tremendous amount of human suffering. The stories behind this data include a lot of tragedy, some of which may cause sadness and hopelessness, and some of which results from it, including youth suicide. But from a developmental psychologist lens, I think what this is screaming at our society is that we don't have the right conditions in place to support children's healthy development and resilience. If more than 2 out of 5 teenagers in our society are consistently sad and hopeless, that is an urgent problem and it is a reflection of our society. This isn't about individual kids and their issues. The teenage years can certainly be, full of angst, but they should also be a time of hope and excitement and adventure, like planning for the future. Teenagers should be dreaming big, like figuring out like what do they want to do with their lives and how to do it. And so I think that what really we want to dominate the teenage years is really optimism, not persistent sadness and hopelessness. So my concerns are that as a society, we're really missing the mark on providing the environments and conditions for kids to develop in healthy ways and be resilient. And even though people are noticing the youth mental health crisis, I think we've been far too narrow-minded about how we're approaching trying to fix it. And I see a lot of band-aid solutions out there, which are admittedly very much easier to fund and implement. But I think we're really ignoring the major root causes, and the band-aids are just not enough.
Yeah, this really resonates with, one of the things that I've been hearing saying repeatedly. There's not a clinical pathway out of this condition. This is not something to look to the healthcare industry to solve for us, although obviously we need access to interventions and care. This is a much bigger problem. And where does that lie, right? For how we start putting optimism back into the framework for young people and having them be growth focused and looking toward the future with sense of energy and engagement, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's exactly right. Like, certainly there are going to be a lot of these children and youth and families who need clinical services. And clinical services can be a way to help families like figure out what is missing for that specific child and family. But I think the pathway to improvement is a lot more about fixing the conditions and the environment than it is about clinical services, right? So, I mean, I'm not minimizing the importance of clinical services, but it's a lot bigger than that. And so I think that what's happening is that today's youth are missing these things they fundamentally need for their development and their well-being. So things like a sense of purpose, a belief that their life is meaningful, a sense of belonging and connections to stable communities, a belief that they can determine the course of their lives, and a worldview that the world is a place that you can be hopeful about and that their life is worth living. So these are basically the ingredients for resilience. And so, I mean, I kind of made some notes about
Yeah,
some of
please.
those like root things if you
Yeah.
want me to go through those
Yeah, please.
that I think,
Good stuff. Yeah.
yeah, I can talk through those. So, and I think there can be a lot of focus on specific things, like we can try to find a simple solution, right? Like we can say it's technology, it's social media, it's the pandemic, it's, whatever it is. But it's actually deeper than that. And all of these things can be like influencing each other. And with any, as with any complex problem, like there's not any simple solutions. But there's a couple of things I think are really important. One of them, I think, is that kids are watching their parents struggle right now in our society, especially like financially and economically. So we have a lot of families that are economically stuck because of income inequality. They're working more and more for paychecks that just don't stretch far enough. So right now we have more Americans working multiple jobs than at any point in the past 25 years. So when teenagers are watching their parents like juggle 2 jobs and still not make ends meet, that's contributing to that sense of like hopelessness. And we've also seen that social mobility is declining. So that's the idea that for the past several generations, each generation was likely to be better off than their parents in terms of their socioeconomic status, and that's usually linked to education. But that's not the case anymore. Today's American kids are not very likely to be better off than their parents. And that's especially the case if parents are low income, because we just don't have the conditions in place for social mobility to be accessible. So it actually turns out that pulling yourself up by the bootstraps actually requires jobs that pay enough to live off of, plus affordable higher education or training to get those jobs. And that's just not really available. So that's the first thing. The second thing I think that's really impacting youth today is that teens are constantly inundated with bad news and negativity. And that impacts their worldview and their sense of optimism. A lot of this comes from their smartphones, from social media. We know that more negative news spreads faster, draws more clicks, it's shared more often. So social media algorithms favor negativity. And today's kids are swamped by that. They've been growing up swamped by that. And this is just really different from what prior generations in America have grown up with, especially for middle class families. Um,
Their parents are
but
their struggling parents are also swamped with that.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely, right? So their parents are swamped with that. They're seeing it too. They're watching the news. They're getting these notifications on their phone. They're seeing it in their social media feed, and they may also be talking about it more in front of their kids, and they might be talking about how it might impact them. And so this is really, just something they're like drowning in negativity. And whether it's political division or natural disasters or crime or just constant social comparison to influencers when it seems like everybody is doing well but you and your community, it's just all contributing to that negative worldview. And I think that sometimes that's like being reinforced in the school environment, sometimes unintentionally. Um, and I haven't done any specific research on this topic, but from what I've seen as a parent, I think that what schools are assigning students to read and the focus of many curricula is like, frankly, depressing. Um, and I think they're doing this with good intentions. Like they're trying to increase empathy, they're trying to help students have greater perspective. Um, and in some cases, they're just being realistic, but taken as a whole, I don't think students are getting a message of hope from their studies in the way that they need, especially in the context of the negativity that they're experiencing everywhere else. So I think that's like the second big thing.
Yeah, well, no, that's a great segue to this next question, because in our previous conversation, which was so captivating, you raised this issue that I haven't been able to stop thinking about, which is the idea that some of what goes on in schools in terms of expectations, structures, programming, that may be contributing to or increasing anxiety in children and maybe their parents, even when it's well intentioned. And that's something I hope, let's unpack that a little bit more. And I know you've been thinking about this too. And we know that there's a Pew Research study in 2023 that found that 61% of teens report feeling significant pressure to succeed academically. When, from a developmental standpoint, when does healthy challenge cross the line into harmful pressure? And do our schools know where that line is? And how does that kind of negative catalog of reading that you were just mentioning play into the formation of that gloomier worldview than is healthful, maybe, for us?
Yeah. Yeah. So I think about this a lot, as we've talked about previously. And I think that today's youth are experiencing school in a really different way than we did. So
Mm.
I really loved school. I thrived there. But I think that I would actually hate school if I were in it right now, despite the fact that there's so many more like cool classes that you can take. I mean, my daughter, who just turned 15, she's a rising sophomore, took some awesome classes last year that I never had the chance to take, like AP Environmental Science, all these dual enrollment courses or whatever. But I think that her overall experience of high school is way more stressful than mine was.
Mm.
So there's a couple of things that I think are behind that. And I want to be clear that I'm not blaming schools for kids' student mental health problems. I think schools are doing the best that they can based on what they know. But I think that we need to re-examine some of these practices, given the situation we're in as a society. So the first thing is that in attempt to give more credit for students' effort and lower the stakes of each individual test or assignment, teachers have moved to having far more assignments than they used to, each
Mm,
worth a smaller portion of the student's grade. And this seems like it's a good idea, but it definitely has some drawbacks. Kids have more to keep track of. Um, they can, lose all of these worksheets. If they miss days, it just piles up on top of them. And I think students also feel that these assignments are like kind of busy work, and they're not meaningful. And that's really disheartening.
mm.
And when you amplify that across 7 classes per semester, it's like really mind-boggling how
Mm.
many assignments students have to turn in.
Yeah, with my
So
middle school boys, it's definitely seemed like a bombardment of
yeah,
scoring coming in constantly for sure.
it it is so many. Like they have so many assignments, and I think that there are a lot of adults in high-paying skilled jobs who don't have that many critical tasks that they have to do at their jobs in an equivalent amount of time. And
Mm,
it's just not developmentally appropriate to
mm,
ask this of teenagers and even middle school students. And this also contributes to grade inflation. So when students are being given a lot of points just for completing a task or putting forth some effort, but not based on their actual mastery of the subject, you end up with kids who appear on their report cards to be doing fine, but standardized tests show and their college professors can attest are actually missing really key skills.
mm,
So that's one part of it. And related to that is that a lot of schools are using online grade books that send these constant reminders about missing assignments or low grades. So kids are not only they have this list they have to manage, they have to they're being constantly harassed about, these assignments that they haven't turned in. And like some of it's just noise. I actually ended up last year having to unsubscribe from all the updates from my daughter's online grade book because I'd get all these emails that she was missing this assignment or she was failing this class. And she'd be like, no, mom, like the teacher just hasn't had time to grade all the stuff I've turned in. And so
yeah,
they
it's
have
like
to just,
constant bombardment. Yeah.
yeah, the teachers are bombarded too, right? Like the teachers are like struggling to get all these grades in, and then the students are like being reminded. And so in addition to that pressure, they have to distinguish between what is the real signal and what is the noise in
Mm,
all those emails. And all of this contributes to cognitive load. So, cognitive load is the amount of mental effort that it takes to handle a task or a set of tasks. Um, but having too high of a cognitive load is like mentally and emotionally draining.
mm,
And research shows that it's linked to academic burnout, mental health problems, and cognitive impairment, just like not being able to do well academically. And new research is showing that there's another aspect of this called digital cognitive load. And so the number of different technology platforms that students have to use, meaning apps or websites, or just even like using screens instead of books and paper, contributes to poor student well-being and poor academic performance.
mm.
And so I think educational technology has really been adopted without a lot of research showing like what are all of the impacts of it. And that's something I think we need to re-examine.
Yeah,
Another thing,
enumerating, I practically feel like I'm breaking out in hives or something from the anxiety of it all. Yeah,
yeah, I know. And that's what our kids are facing every day. So like no
yeah.
wonder they feel under pressure. But even deeper than that is that Um, I think schools feel pressure to boost students' test scores. And so and even like boost their grades so that they can get into college. And that has resulted in them focusing on sort of more shallow skills that they think are going to show up on these tests
Mm,
in lieu of these deeper critical reasoning skills. So, for example, like reading shorter passages than rather than like analyzing whole books, right? And so students aren't necessarily learning the real, like deeper skills that they need that are training their ability to pay attention, to think critically, to remember a wide variety of facts and integrate them and analyze them. So their actual cognitive and intellectual development is suffering at the same time as they're being like bombarded with all of these assignments. And I want to be clear that today's students are not any less capable than prior generations of developing these attention and critical thinking skills. But when we stop expecting them to and stop demanding that they do it, and instead give them all these other, like, sort of less meaningful, shallow tasks that they have to manage instead, these skills aren't going to develop in the majority of students.
Yeah.
And that also impacts their mental health. Like, they have less sense of competence,
Yeah.
a lower sense of self-efficacy, and that leads to low self-esteem and anxiety and depression. Like, our kids deep down know that they're missing skills that they need to succeed in life. But it's like our conditions are not helping them develop those skills. And instead, we're focusing on all this kind of like shallower, like busy work that they
Yeah. It's
also
like
feel is not very meaningful.
their sense of priority is being miscalibrated or something like that with all
Yeah.
this. Yeah.
Yeah. They're basically being overwhelmed with these tasks that are a huge executive functioning load for a child or, a teenager. But at the same time, they're like not necessarily being pushed to develop the really deep critical thinking skills that they actually need and that can help them sort of critically reason even about these things, right?
Yeah.
And I think, another issue that is, probably somewhat controversial is the use of AI. That we have students now outsourcing a significant amount of their learning to AI, which means that they aren't really learning it themselves. So more than 50%, and by some estimates, two-thirds of ChatGPT and OpenAI tasks are students' school assignments. And we know this because the volume of queries on these platforms drops precipitously when kids are out of school. And of course, this includes college students too. But what studies are starting to show is that even highly educated, intelligent adults like physicians and software engineers rapidly lose their job-related skills when they rely on AI,
Yeah.
even when they have decades of experience building these skills. So, what is that doing to our children when we're overwhelming them with so many assignments and giving them all this homework? And then they're just like going home and they're so desperate that they're just like using ChatGPT to write all their essays and, their short answer questions. Like, we're really, I think, doing a lot of harm unintentionally by enabling this system that has, kind of rapidly come upon these situations that have kind of rapidly evolved in our society.
That was like jumped on a collective bandwagon for impairing our cognitive function or something,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
And I don't think it was intentional, right? Like,
No.
nobody meant for any of this to happen, but it's just sort of the culmination of all these different pressures that schools and then students and families have been put under. And I think it's making kids feel like, they're overwhelmed, they're anxious, they lack self-efficacy, they lack agency, they lack optimism, because they're like swamped by all of these things, and they're coping the best they can. I mean, that's why they're doing the homework. That's why they're using ChatGPT or any tool they have available, because they want those good grades. They want to go to college. They're trying their best, but we've sort of created a situation that's put them between a rock and a hard place. And they're not really developing the skills that they truly need to be resilient and to have, high well-being.
Yeah, no, it's a pretty grim scenario, and we'll get as we come toward our closing exchange. We have to cling to our that optimism, which was the necessary thing for kids' well-being, is as necessary for their parents and others. We have to come away with something we're going to speak to as far as how we can be optimistic about these young folks' management of this overload, and otherwise
It's
we're gonna we're gonna feel too gloomy about the whole thing, right?
Yeah. Yeah. No, I definitely think there's a pathway out of this, but
Yeah,
it will take some collective action. And I really love to think about Jane Goodall's definition of hope.
yeah,
And if you haven't read her last book, especially, I highly recommend it. But she talks about hope as not just this passive wishful thinking, but real hope requires engagement and action, that you believe that a better world is possible and that you're going to take action to do it. You're going to figure out what you need to do. Like that's what real hope is. And
yeah.
I think that's what we need. We have to figure out how to fix this.
Well, and right now, urgently on the micro level, family to family need to figure out how to make that correction, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, as a parent, I have two kids. My daughter is 15 and my son is, he'll be 12 in a couple of months. And I would say that my parenting is informed every day by the challenges that our society puts out there. Knowing what my kids are facing and how it is impacting them and how it could impact them shapes every decision that I make as a parent.
Mm, mm,
And especially the past few years as they've become, adolescents and teens, I've really put a lot of effort into cultivating their independence, their sense of self-efficacy and agency, the responsibilities that I put on them, their sense of hope. And, that definitely requires that I also make a lot of efforts to make sure they have the skills that they need. And that means I do a lot of things to manage their use of technology and make sure that's, counterbalanced with deep reading of, actual long books. So like my son plays video games all the time, but I make sure that over the course of the week, he reads books as many hours as he does play video games, right? Because he needs those critical thinking skills. He needs to, develop the skills that he needs. And so I think there's a lot of things that parents can do, but you really do need an awareness of how our society is impacting our kids to be able to sort of counterbalance what they're absorbing from society.
yeah. No, the good recommendations, and we'll come back to that. But something you said about how everything you do is so informed by this environment leads me to this next question, which is, we hear the term trauma informed all the time across all these different practice areas in schools and policy in the media. But what does that mean in practice? And what does it look like when it's being done well versus just the label of the day?
Yeah. Yeah. So this is really at the heart of a lot of the work that I do. And I would say that trauma-informed practice is really about approaching everything with consideration of people's life experiences. This includes students, families, staff, everyone. And not just the negative life experiences, but all of their life experiences. It's about knowing that when people experience trauma, healing and recovery is possible, but you have to enable that healing and that recovery by intentionally building resilience, by using that word counterbalancing again, like counterbalancing adversity with positivity, with positive experiences. And so, what this looks like in practice, I think, is about being responsive to individualized needs, promoting healing, encouraging resilience. Um, it means focusing on safety, and that means physical, psychological safety, um, emotional regulation, skill building. And I think just as important as what it is what it is not. So, trauma informed practices are not about lowering expectations, not about getting everyone therapy or trying to turn teachers or other staff into therapists. It's really having that knowledge of what it means to respond to people's needs with a lens of their life experiences and not even just their own life experiences, like going back to that idea of intergenerational trauma. It's about their families' life experiences, their communities' life experiences, and that history that's carried, and just doing what is needed to be responsive to that. think that's what it's
Mm.
really all about.
No, that makes a lot of sense. And it seems like the breadth of trauma is like we've barely tapped into when you think about intergenerational trauma. I just immediately think, okay, so what are those, what's that 1% of families that have escaped all intergenerational trauma? It seems like a pretty universalized experience, right?
Yeah. And I think that's the case that we're never going to live in a utopia, right? Like trauma and adversity are just aspects of the human condition. And what we have to do is have the conditions in place for people to be resilient. And I mean, certainly we should try to prevent every form of trauma that we can, right? But it's never going to be possible to do that. So what we have to do is help people have the resilience that they need to recover and to thrive despite that. And that's what I
Yeah.
think is missing in today's youth. They're not getting that.
It's that optimism and positivity about the future you were talking about earlier. I mean, I just think about the trees analogy, the bent tree because it was hit by a boulder at some point or something, but it comes down to growing strong toward the light. And that's what kids need to be inspired to
Yeah.
do through whatever it is, right?
Exactly. And I think using the tree analogy, like taking that a little bit further, is, the example of like a tree that is so well supported that it doesn't experience any stress from wind or whatever will eventually just collapse under its own weight because its roots don't grow strong enough. What trees need is to experience the
Be
wind.
tested,
They need to
right?
experience some stress, right? And that is something that's like a biological process that we grow stronger in response to stress. But that stress can't be so overwhelming, especially when the tree doesn't have strong roots yet, right? Like in childhood, those roots aren't fully developed. Um, and so, and you could take that analogy even further with like how trees are connected to each other and they're, fungal networks that are under the soil and they share nutrients and they do all kinds of amazing things that like trees actually support each other and aren't meant to be just like one single tree alone. Like trees are meant to be in a forest. And we're like that as people too. Like we need our connections with each other. We need supports. We need to be part of communities and families that there's give and take, that you both meaningfully contribute to and get support from.
Yeah. Isolation is deadly, right? For well, so many creatures.
Yeah.
So we're going to get close to the end of our time. So there's a couple more things I want to make sure I have time to ask you today. So heading toward that optimistic note, where do you see genuine progress in terms of communities, schools, systems where things really seem to be working and children are measurably better off as a consequence of whatever it is?
Yeah, definitely. So I'll give two examples, and one is related to that multi-system involvement, right? So when we have families that have complex needs, often across generations, where I see the greatest improvement is in practices that are intentionally multi-generational and cross systems. So
Mm,
things like high fidelity wraparound, where there's the use of peer support and a real focus on joint accountability, which is hard because systems are sort of built in silos, and we have to be really intentional about um, creating that joint accountability across systems. So I think, agencies in Colorado that are really have been able to implement that high fidelity wraparound, I think we see a lot of real improvement there. Like those youth and families are really measurably better off. And then I
just
think,
and for a sec, just high fidelity wraparound. Tell us what that means.
yeah. So
I
it's an
know we heard that
evidence-based
term. Yeah.
practice. Yeah, it's an evidence-based practice that's a form of care coordination for children and families with complex needs who are multi-system involved. And it involves putting together teams of people with a neutral facilitator who doesn't work for any of the systems. Like they don't work for child welfare, they don't work for juvenile justice, they work at another agency, like they're neutral. And their job is to pull together a team to help this family. And as much as there's an emphasis on these professional supports, there's an emphasis on natural supports. So helping the family get better connected to um, their own natural supports, their family, their community, their faith, their culture, whatever the resources are that are meaningful for that child and family based on their strengths, their interests, their culture, and really prioritizing those individualized needs. And so that's what the process is, and it's an evidence-based practice that is becoming, I think, more widespread in Colorado. But it is inherently kind of difficult because our systems aren't meant for that kind of collaboration. We have to really work at it. Um, and it also uses peer support. And I think that's another piece of it that's really critical is that when you have families and youth who have experienced a lot of not getting their needs met by systems, it can be really difficult to engage them and like get them to trust systems. But when you have something that's different and you have people who have lived experience themselves working on your team, that's what we mean by peer support. I think that's where you can really make a difference because that empathy that can be provided by someone with lived experience is it's kind of the secret sauce, I think, for just engaging people in services and getting to the point that there's enough trust to implement that team process.
Yeah. It just strikes me when, as you put it, systems that aren't really designed to collaborate or systems that aren't serving the needs of the people. I'm thinking part of our problems, we keep calling them systems because systems by definition would be things that collaborate and meet the needs of the people. And without that, it's not exactly a system. It's some other kind of crazy cluster of vying interests and parallel or, oddly intersecting and overlapping policy formations that have
Yeah,
never been systematic, right?
right. Or it's multiple systems that each have competing pressures and demands and requirements instead of one system,
Yeah.
which is what we need. So I think that's the biggest thing. And I would say the other real success that I've seen is working with schools in which we've been able to really kind of back up from, the issues with students and focus on the educators.
Hmm.
Because if the adults who are in the system are not in a place of well-being, they can't really meet the individualized needs of their students. And so, sort of backing up and thinking about how to improve the well-being and the skills of the adults who are working with children is another place that I think is really there's a lot we can do there, and I've seen a lot of success.
Well, and it really ties back to your earlier observation about the struggle of the adults really has an impact on the well-being of the kids, and who should be surprised by that? And
Right.
we've got struggling adults in all kinds of ways, both in that workforce that serves kids directly, but their parents struggling because it's impossible to seemingly so challenging to make an adequate living, right? While balancing all of the demands of
Yeah,
being
absolutely.
there. Yeah. So many things to talk about and could go on for a long time, but we're going to wrap it up. And I just want to make sure that we have a couple of minutes to go back to those parents. If there's parents listening right now and they're in the midst of this same environment that we're in, and worried about the kids across all the fronts that you've described so eloquently, what do you want them to know? What are some takeaway messages for us?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, first of all, I would encourage any parent whose child is struggling to seek help. And if they think they're struggling with mental health concerns, certainly seek services. or an assessment. But perhaps even more important than getting therapy is taking a look at, what does your child need to thrive? Is it the connections with real human beings? Is it independence? Is it a sense of meaning and purpose, hope, self-efficacy, agency? What is it that your child might be missing? So figuring out what you can do to help them get what they need. And again, like, a mental health provider can help you do this, but don't ignore the big picture. Don't ignore what's really going on and how our society is impacting our children. Because it's not just about treating symptoms, it's about creating conditions where children and youth can thrive. Giving them the skills that they need to be resilient, And I think that's something that, sometimes we think about resilience as this like inherent quality that you either have it or you don't, or, whatever. It's just about like being able to bounce back. But that's not really what it is. Resilience is a set of skills that can be learned by anyone, that can be intentionally built. And it's also both an individual property and it's a collective property, meaning that we are resilient in a large part because of our connections to other people. So I think today's parents have to be really intentional about, parenting in a way that specifically addresses what our children experience from society. And I think, when I think about my own, like, why I got into this field and like why I chose to study psychology, I have a lot of personal reasons for that. And one of them is that I experienced some really significant adversity as a child. But I had the conditions in place to be able to be resilient and thrive in spite of that. And that's possible for everyone. And we need to make that possible for every child and family in this country. Like, we need to put those conditions in place. And I think parents have sometimes more ability than they think they do to really make a huge difference in their child's life. They may be feeling overwhelmed by negativity, and all of these things can seem like they're really impossible to overcome, but they're not. These are solvable problems. And together we can have hope and we can solve these problems on a collective level, and we can protect children in individual families by intentionally counterbalancing, what they're experiencing from society.
And to some extent, it's that simple saying of knowing that it's possible and believing that it's possible, and storytelling, because humans have made it through all kinds of adversity, and there's no point in comparing one person or one culture's adversity with another. But the fact is that humans persist somehow, and some of it has to do with knowing that it's possible, as you put it, and learning that kind of resilience and capacity for getting on and growing and being well, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, it was a pleasure to talk. I think we
Yeah.
could have gone on for a couple more hours, but it was really great to be able to just, kind of talk through some of these issues today. And I really hope that, people will take away from this both an awareness of some of the things that are impacting youth mental health, and our well-being as a society, but also some thinking about what can we do, both individually and collectively, to collectively, or to solve these problems, like on a kind of across all these levels.
That's great. Well, we'll schedule another conversation so that we can carry on.
Yeah, sounds good. Thanks, Vincent.
Thank you so much.
All right.
That's Dr. Brock-Baca.
All right. Have a great day.
You too.
Thank you for tuning in to Mental Health Colorado's Voices for Healthier Minds interview series. We invite you to learn more about Mental Health Colorado's nonprofit and nonpartisan health mission and join our statewide network of advocates, the Brainwave, to stay updated on what's happening in health policy at the state capitol and how you can get involved in passing laws, changing practices, and building a movement to make Colorado a leader in health and well-being. Visit our website at www.mentalhealthcolorado.org for more information.